All right, let's talk about some things regarding becoming wise, and that is number one. Remember discipline. We did this 2 weeks ago on discipline, so I wanted to pick up some of those things just to kind of touch base with them again. Discipline involves number one, a hatred of what? Hate. You have to hate evil. You have to hate wrongdoing. You have to hate it. That's what it. So we have, just for example, this is from Proverbs 1 and 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But then we have, what is the fear of the Lord? So look at Proverbs 8 and 13. Proverbs 8 and 13. What is the fear of the Lord? So someone read out 8 and 13 of Proverbs. You have to hate evil. And that's what is involved in wisdom. It's interesting to note that you not only have to have a love of something, but you have to have a hatred of something as well. So that's what wisdom involves. So based on that, you have like 16 and 6 as well. Let's look at 16 and 6. And then someone pick up Job 28 and 28. Job. Yeah. Okay. Let's go 16 and 6 of Proverbs. Or 14 and 27, the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life to depart from the snares of death. So we used the illustration last week, and this is from Walter Porter in the book, that it is children don't learn, or they don't have this hatred of evil. They don't have that. They have to learn it. And how do they learn to hate that which is wrong? How do they learn to shun that which is wrong? Huh? Okay, number one, their mind's a blank slate in some respects. So we have to teach them, parents have to teach them what is wrong, and you have to sometimes inflict some pain. There has to be some pain involved in order for them to shun what is wrong. It's just not, okay, that's not good for you. That's going to kill you if you get out there. No, no, there have to be some pain sometimes inflicted. So, for example, also here's this is the illustration that was used by Porter also. That's what liquor does to an individual. Liquor, alcoholic beverages, actually makes the mind of an individual like a child, because that child or that mind has very little discernment of right and wrong, good and evil. That's why, of course, you see that people try to get drunk to do certain things and they get inebriated, but they actually lose their inhibition to do wrong. And that's what the child is like. So what we're doing when people drink, they actually revert back to a childlike behavior. Would you agree with that, Jim? Sometimes? How would you put it? That's right. All right. Yeah. Inhibition to do wrong. Go ahead. Right. That's right. There's no fear of the Lord. What was the word you used? Judgment. Yeah, you don't have judgment. You don't have good judgment. You don't have the fear of the Lord. You don't recognize what is wrong, and you don't avoid what's wrong. So that's why Solomon embodies evilness or evil by speaking about alcoholic beverage. And he does that on several occasions in the book of Proverbs. Let's just notice one of them. This is in chapter 23 and verse 23. This is not in your book, I don't believe. 23 verse 29, I'm sorry. 23 of Proverbs, and the verse is 29. That's a sad picture, isn't it? It is a tragic picture. It not only shows us the loss of good judgment, as Jim would put it, but it also shows us the addictive qualities of alcoholic beverages. When will I awake? I will seek it again. Addictions cannot be confined only to alcoholic beverages, but a lot of different things. But there's a good illustration of what happens when we drink alcohol, and it gives us an illustration of losing our judgment. So, becoming wise, you're going to avoid alcohol. You're going to avoid having a childlike mind. You need to have a good respect for God, which involves a hatred of evil and the evil way. And that's what this is all about in this particular segment. So here's something else. Here's another way that you learn about evil, and that is you experience the consequences of it. So this is from He's using 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18, actually, that fear has to do with punishment. Punishment. Or Proverbs 22 and 15, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. I am amazed that from the 1950s forward, Dr. Spock has taken over child rearing and given parents the idea that they should not be spanking their children, they should not discipline them, but in this passage and in many others, Solomon tells us, drive that out of a child, and you do it with a rod of discipline. Pretty simple, isn't it? So you learn to avoid evil by experiencing the consequences, and when a child is young, the consequences must be from the parents. But as they grow older, the consequences become heavier. What are some of the consequences that people learn? All right, jail. You go to jail. So I'm driving over here, I saw it. Drive, drink, go to jail. Okay, that's what it is. That's the formula. So you go to jail. You cross the law. Let's back up even before that. Let's go back into grade school. Okay, what are the disciplinary factors there? Or what are the factors that cause people to learn? Say again. Paddling. What did you say? Well, failing is one thing. If a child fails, but in elementary school, I don't know if that's, Well, if the parent-teacher conference were there, it'd be good if the parents were going to be on the same page. But I'm kind of with Karen is paddling. When I started teaching in East Texas, I was in Marshall, and it was a junior high, and they started a program where you wore uniforms. At first, I was against uniforms. I thought, I don't know about that. But they had the kids wearing uniforms. It was probably 60% black, 40% white was a racial mix. And they had them wear uniforms in the junior high, and the principal, her name was Miss Jones, she walked around with a big wooden paddle. It wasn't spanking the hands. She grabbed hold of people, put your hands on the wall. Jim knows about this. This is how it used to be. Let them have it right there. Now, that was in 2001, I think, or something like that, 2000. So I moved over here, and I remember telling Nita about it when I met Nita. She said, her response, that's against the law, isn't it? I said, you know what? It's the policy of Wichita Falls ISD to take it out, but it's not against the law to do it. And it is something that I think if they implemented it in the schools, it would make the discipline or the behavior a lot better. That's my opinion. But uniforms also. Do you know what the uniform policy in East Texas, in Marshall at least in those years, do you know the behavior improved? People behave when they're held to a higher standard, even in what they wear, just like in the military. They're held to a higher standard. They can't put their hands in their pockets, and I guess they used to be. You can't put your hands in your pockets, isn't that right? Yeah, you don't stand around like this, and jingle your keys, and none of that kind of stuff. You keep your hair off your collar, you keep your mustache on the corners of your mouth. It was just very strict policies, but that lends itself to good behavior. Here's something else. I know they've done, go ahead, Dan. You remember being grounded. No one else in here has ever been grounded, I guess, before. I guess you're the only one. No, Jan's going to say, no, that's not right. I was grounded too. Well, the point simply is that we learn to discipline from the home, but we have to somehow, what we want to occur is to instill in our children the self-discipline, that they ingest the principles and they can learn self-discipline from the discipline and the boundaries that we set for them when they were younger. And if they don't, then they learn from the consequences, whether it be in the schools or the police, whatever it may be, but there are consequences to poor behavior, and those consequences are to teach others, not simply the person, but teach others, no, don't behave in this way. So that's what discipline is all about, and that's what our society has lacked so sorely, isn't it? So I was going to mention regarding the military that they have done a number of studies, and the studies are that some of the units in the military, they relax some of the standards of dress and the standards of facial hair and headgear and that kind of thing. Tattoos, they've relaxed it. And you know, what happens is they bring the ghetto into the military because they begin to behave like they do on the street. And that's a sad situation, isn't it? Just because, not all units, but that's what a lot of units have done in the past. They've just relaxed the standards, and pretty soon, you don't have a cohesive, tight fighting unit that would be a really smart unit, and that's how it has happened. That always is the case. Also, it's the case that people always push the boundaries, isn't it? We, by nature, push the boundaries, try to lower the standards always. We always complain. This happened at school the other day. So I was in a board meeting, and we're talking about picking up the dress code for next year, making it a little bit more snappy. And because now kids are wearing shower shoes, I think, oh, this, I guess they call them slides. They put a slide on this. No, they call them slides. They slide, yeah, something like that. Anyway, well, they wearing shorts and those kind of things, and I've been pushing for a tighter dress code and getting something else done on this. So when we were talking about it in the board meeting, one of the women said, well, you know what, the reason we relaxed the standards was because the administration was always fighting with the kids about the dress code. I said, what has changed? The standards have relaxed and they're way down here. And what are they doing? We're always fighting with the kids about the dress code. Still, we're not solving the problem by giving in to the kids for a lesser dress code. We're not solving that problem. That's always going to be there because people push the boundaries. If you put the boundary down here, they're going to push it lower. Isn't that right? Yeah, and that's what happens. You know what? I'm glad you mentioned that because in looking at the next year for Wichita Christian, so some of the issues that you just mentioned have come up. So the administration says, they're telling prospective parents for next year saying, well, we do have, not everything's perfect, as everybody recognizes here at the school. And we still have some discipline issues and some issues that arise. But I, coming from a juvenile detention background and Denver alternative school background, I say, that may be true, but you have no idea. There's no comparison. None. No comparison in a private school. None. In WFISD, they would have kids having sex in the hallways. I'm telling you, that's the kind of stuff that's going on. In the hallways, inside. And that was going on. They would have kids with carts in the classroom doing some pot or marijuana. And the teachers say, just don't do it in the class. That was from the time I began juvenile detention until the time I left it. That's the kind of stuff that's going on. And I tell you, they say, well, we have problems here at Wichita Christian too. Some of the kids are disrespectful. I said, oh yeah, wow, okay. Yeah. Well, I found out a kid got on a site that shouldn't he have been on. Wow, oh, okay, all right. Yeah, that kind of goes on. But the caliber, as you said, the word you used, caliber problem is not nearly what it is in the public system. So, Randy, so here's something what we need is discipline, and we need to ingest it into ourselves. Self-discipline. And so there was an admiral who has, and you might know about this, Dan. He did a speech at UT. What was that man's name? McCracken. Admiral McCracken just came to me. Have you seen that one? Has anybody seen about it? It's called Make Your Bed. So he spoke to the graduating class at UT several years ago, and it's on YouTube, and you ought to look it up. He said, I'm going to tell you how to be successful. He says, number one, make your bed. Everybody's like, what? Make your bed. In the morning, you get up, don't be slovenly, make your bed. And he goes through the why, because you're disciplining yourself to set yourself some standards, and you're going to keep those standards, so make your bed. He said if the day goes haywire and if it goes downhill, then he says when you come home, you'll have a made bed. And that's nice. So I said, but the little things are the things that cause us to have a better disciplined life. And that's what this is all about, self-discipline. So that's what we're getting into here when we talk about learning. So, all right, so we learn from pain. The goal, of course, is healing, that we might be healed. or that we might have better outcomes, that is, just give us a better outcome on our behavior. So let's talk about a couple of other things regarding the love of learning here. This is number 2 in the book. Before we get to it, I wanted to read this paragraph. I thought there's a couple of lines here that he had. I thought this is too good to pass up. So I wanted to read it. This is from on page 66 in my book. I don't know where it is in yours, but it's the love of learning is in there. And he had a statement or two. 79. Okay. So it is this. It's right before he has Proverbs 17 and 10 on the book. 17 and 10. He says, neither observing nor experiencing the just application of punishment encourages violence. On the contrary, it generates healthy fear and restraint. However, Solomon also said, general forms of correction are all that are needed for the wise. So a reproof enters more into the wise man than 100 stripes into the heart of a fool. Or reprove one that has understanding, he will understand knowledge. That is, simple verbal correction is all that's needed with many hearts. Indeed, being too forceful can be unjust, so to flog noble men is wrong. Proverbs 17:26. So here's his comments. The wise application of punishment is the most powerful technique available to restrain evil both within the individual and within a community. We lacking that? That is exactly what we're lacking. Withholding punishment is like permitting the weeds to grow in a garden or tolerating rust in a machine, allowing an infection to remain in the body. Rightly used, it can be an act of mercy and kindness, even to the point of saving lives. Indeed, psychologists have punished infants with electric shock to cure them of chronic rheumative vomiting, when other forms of punishments have failed. Electric shock has also been used paradoxically to cure self-mutilation in children. Some, for example, would bite their fingers off, pull out their fingernails with their teeth, poke out their eyes, and chew off their shoulders down to the bone. Before discovering the effectiveness of corporal punishment, these children were kept in full body restraints, often for years at a time, a cruel form of prolonged bondage. So Solomon recognized the paradox of all of this 3,000 years ago. He said, do not withhold discipline from the child. If you beat him with a rod, he will not what? Die. He will not die. If you beat him with a rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. Give some discipline. It should be noted, however, that certain kinds of self-restraint and discipline involve only a form of pseudo-wisdom, that is, developing an irrational obedience to some legalistic system is really not the idea. Then he mentions Colossians 2:20-23. So that's about discipline and incorporating that into our own lives. So let's turn attention to number 2. And I think this is so important, and so, to me, it is something that it's going to touch all of us, and I think it's going to touch us pretty hard, myself included. So it's about love of learning. So the fear of the Lord, hatred of evil, produces self-restraint and discipline, but that's just the beginning of wisdom. Plowing a field, refining ore, removing a diseased tissue accomplishes nothing unless useful crops are grown, goods are manufactured, or the wound heals. The next component is an emotional, motivational state of mind that is necessary, and that is to love, and is love learning. You have to love learning. So let's just talk about that for a moment. So regarding the body, our physical bodies, they're set with the trajectory by the DNA, and we're going to grow older. There's nothing we can do about it, but the mind is different. Our mind is, in some senses, a blank slate, and it is our responsibility to take care of that and to put into the mind only those things that benefit ourselves, make us wiser, make us better people. But unfortunately, we don't follow that formula very well. We get on autopilot, such as our body. Is it time for me to quit? Oh, okay. He's looking at the clock. I thought, what? I see that when people look at the clocks. I say, what? Yes, ma'am. Well, he has it right here in this book, for example. It's Love of Learning, page 79. I'm reading right from the book. So the psychologist Walter Porter pointed out, he said, the body is in some senses on autopilot. It's not to say that you cannot change the trajectory of your physical well-being, but it is to say that you can't stop yourself from growing old. You can't do that. You can't stop yourself from losing your hair. That's just, amen. And, right? That's what happens to us. So, okay, but the mind is something different. And it is your responsibility, my responsibility, to put into the mind only those things that are beneficial for wisdom's purpose and for godliness' sake. But unfortunately, we don't do that frequently because of the lack of, what's that word, the D word? Discipline, lack of discipline to do what we need to do to put into our minds what we ought to do. So, for example, this is the next page, this is page 80. So continuing this track, and then we'll look at the texts. Being free means that we have an independent will. What we become in mind depends to a large extent on what we choose to become. If we would be wise and so capable of productive living, we must set our hearts to get wisdom. And that's what Solomon says. Above all things, this is Proverbs 4. The principal thing, get wisdom. So that's what we need to do. That's chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. We must orient our will to get knowledge and understanding, wisdom. It is a personal responsibility. No one can make me wise without my cooperation. I have to do it. So, there's a natural disinclination to learn useful knowledge and develop good understanding because it requires what? Work. Hard work. It takes hard work to learn and to discipline yourself to ingest good things and to push yourself to learn more things. It just takes a lot of work. Yes, sir. Well, that's also true, but we're talking about right now, we have to discipline ourselves to love learning. So here's the point. All of this to come down to. Are we listening? The casual trivia that we experience and remember in our routine living rarely contributes to the development of wisdom. It would be like junk food, which may be enjoyable but does not provide much nutrition. All right? People love learning, but they don't come to the knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy 3 and 7. All right? Can you think of some ideas that show us, illustrate what he's talking about? Yes, sir. And it's hard. Now, it's more difficult for her that she's in this position in life. So, here's how Brother Jimmy Allen would illustrate it in Bible class at Harding University. He says, the first principle, and he would call it a Bible study. Not time yet. What? I know. I say, watching watches is not my favorite thing. I might go 5 minutes over. What do you think about that idea? I'm going to do it. He would illustrate it this way. He would say, the first rule in Bible study, it says, stand up. Remember this? Stick out your arm. Walk over here. Hit the off button on that television set. Number one. That's number one rule. All right. So what robs us of good learning time? Number one, television, entertainment. Well, we're coming to that in a minute. All right. We're on track here. So let me see your telephone. Do you have your telephone with you? Oh, that's right. No, okay. So here we go. Here's another way. I walk around, I see people all the time just, they're always, so what, and you get on Facebook and TikTok, what value is there in that kind of stuff? It's entertainment. So sometimes I'll get on Facebook and I'll like something and I'll think, I just was on here 1/2 hour. What am I doing? And what did I accomplish? It's an addiction. It's an addiction. And you have to fight it. Yes, sir. And you know what they're not doing? Reading a book. There's a difference in reading a book, and I don't mean just a novel. I don't mean just a Harlequin romance. I mean a book that's worthwhile. We're not too addicted to learning. As a matter of fact, that's why the attendance has dropped off on Sunday nights. And we don't even have it here in this congregation because the attendance was so low. It was about less than 10 people before COVID. And we never picked it up. Why? Because we're more interested in the television and TikTok and entertainment than we are in learning. Same thing with Wednesday night. So that's what's happening. When you go to the doctor's office in the waiting room, no one's reading a book, hardly. Very seldom. Anymore, if you're on the plane, a lot of people do read books. And I always look, I say, I wonder what this guy's reading here. I think, You know, when I used to go, and I haven't in a long time, but I'd visit some preachers and I'd say, okay, I wonder what this preacher's about. You know what I would, and this might be, you say, well, that's kind of a harsh judgment. Maybe so. What I do, I say, let me see your library. I see what you're about. I know what you're doing. They're all feel good, pop psychology, pop religion. Just fun stuff. I think, yeah. And that's what they're spending their time doing. They're not digging. They're not pushing the envelope and learning more. They're not digging. Instead, we're just kind of a feel-good book. Just, you know, not to say this wrong. I like to read something light every once in a while myself, just because sometimes heavy reading, I think, okay, I got to lighten it up here because I get, Well, I have several books, 800 pages I'm working through. I'm like, but you know, every once in a while I think, okay, I need to pick something up so I can just read and not have to take so many notes and study. And you know, when I'm reading something on whether it's Napoleon or whether I have to look up so much stuff on the phone. Yes, I do use the phone for that. Where is this place? What does the 18 Brumaire mean? What is that? I have to look all that stuff up. So, okay, I see, because but the point simply is that we are, as a people, we're too addicted to entertainment, whether it be television, movies, TikTok, Facebook, and we spend so much time that we cannot spend quality time studying the Bible. We just don't do it. So, or studying any heavy material. We just don't do it. So, for example, in the classes in schools now, in those classes, do you know what do you think the teachers are doing regarding classical literature? Right. Classical literature, what are you talking about? They don't read any of that Shakespeare stuff. They don't read any of that Isaac Newton stuff. They don't read that kind of stuff. Well, you know what? It makes you a better person in some respects. You know, there are people who write on a plane that's way up here. And we need to challenge ourselves to get up there and quit just like, okay, I don't like it. We need to challenge ourselves. Get up there. So that's my thought on it generally. Now, I'm a little bit on the soapbox, obviously, maybe a lot here. But feel free to knock me off of it here if you want me to. If you want to. All right, Jan. Go ahead, Jan. Here's something to think about. I think we ought to read materials that not just Christian materials, but things that are opposing Christianity. For example, there was an earth-shattering, a world-shaking book that was put out in 1859. It changed the trajectory of America. What was it? Origin of the Species. I bet we haven't read it, though. What he had to say about it. You did. But see, those are things that have changed. So people have been talking about that book and talking about that philosophy ever since. It's right in the public schools. But you know what? We don't We don't bother ourselves with that kind of material. So I don't say just read only materials that are written by members of the Church of Christ. I say have a wide variety of materials to read. But the idea is love of learning. All right, knock me off the soapbox here. Dan, going to do it right now. Well, you know what, and we'll wrap it up here, but you know, that's a good point. Regarding sports, that's one reason I encourage young people to play sports, because of discipline to do the sport. Not because I want to put everything in the sports basket and I want them to be an athlete for the rest of their lives and to forget Bible study, but it is a discipline that people need to learn. And I appreciated that. So, all right, we're over time. Let's stop right here, and then, so on my new computer, we'll see if I can get this PowerPoint up. I don't know how it's going to work, so we might have delayed a couple minutes. All right, anything else to add or subtract before we conclude and close shop?